This is our next session is going to bring together some industry representatives to provide an understanding of AI adoption and emerging trends for AI in health across both academic and clinical settings. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Painadis. I'm the Executive Director for Research Initiatives at the Kennedy Institute here at Rice. And I'm joined, and everyone helpfully lined up under their picture, so you can refer back to this if you forget. Starting with Duncan Ng, from Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Vultr. Dr. Chris Simmons, Scientist in Residence at Cambridge Computer. Seth Sweden, Technical Sales Engineer at Mark III Systems. And Darren Thomason, Vice President of Customer Engineering for Arista Networks. They're bringing us the Wi-Fi. So I have a set of 3 questions that we prepared just to get things started. Hopefully we'll have time for audience questions at the end. And the first, we're going to ask a question, and we'll take turns, hopefully giving everyone a chance to speak. My first question is also give you an opportunity to give you more of an introduction of yourselves, but I'm going to ask you for what is a use case of AI solutions in health, and we'll start by going from your left to right. Yeah, so start with Duncan. Sorry. Audience left.
Hi. So we're very lucky at Vultr getting to work essentially across a broad portfolio of healthcare, everything from drug discovery, precision medicine, all the way through the most boring use cases, post-clinical. I've got use cases where people are using generative AI to help fight health insurance companies for physicians groups and hospitals to make better claims, and vice versa, health insurance companies to fight against hospitals to make claims against physicians groups as well. It is such an innovative space right now. All of the different ways from a basic science to a drug discovery to a, into the clinical field, how in the clinical field do we even help patients? We oftentimes think of the clinical as, that doctor or medical worker interfacing with a particular patient. What about their post-appointment contact, their pre-appointment contact, so that we can go ahead and set these things up to allow automation to take a greater and greater hold. So it is every single step we've had an opportunity to work with different use cases, and we're only continuing to see more and more development of how artificial intelligence is getting added into different segments of the work stream.
Thank you. Chris?
All right, so AI is something that we as in like computational scientists and computer scientists have been doing for decades, right? And we tend to use open science, big batch HPC systems. And now that we're starting to productize AI and bring it into the healthcare and the hospital space, we now need to figure out who the hell's going to run these systems, right? So there's a couple of different models you can do. You can have your research computing group learn how enterprise IT manages data and manages processes. You can take the enterprise IT world and you can have them figure out how to run bare metal batch HPC systems, but bring all their multi-tenant, zero trust security architecture to it, which is a huge challenge. Or you can throw a bunch of money at the wall and pay the cloud to solve the problem for you. But there you have worries about cost control and things like that. So one of my jobs at Cambridge Computer is to identify new products and help bring them to the field and put them into production to solve interesting challenges. And one solution we have that we're starting to deploy a lot is around building your own on-prem, multi-tenant, secure self-service cloud. That is, it has the interfaces that the researchers used to. You click this, you get a Jupyter notebook. You click that, you run a Slurm job. You have SAS, data, et cetera. But it looks like an enterprise VM farm for the enterprise IT to manage it. And this is the kind of projects we're working on. We just deployed in the Harvard Med School Secure Enclave, which uses a SuperPod architecture along with this self-service cloud. And we're currently working with some hospital-affiliated research organizations to try to bring that solution to them as well.
Thank you. Seth?
Yeah, so we help customers, clients modernize their HPC environments. So the idea is to kind of re-architect maybe CPU-based architectures they've used in the past with modern NVIDIA GPU hardware, software at the core. One use case of that, one of a pharmaceutical customers we have has kind of been leaning into growing AlphaFold use cases, taking that and then doing sort of virtual screening with those proteins that they've created. While that doesn't magically create, okay, here's our new drug, it helps to scope the research and really focus the efforts. You can then take that and kind of correlate that against EHR, customer data, patient data that they have to then scope down who you want to run those trials against. That drastically cuts down on the time to market for those drugs. And then the other piece is not just new development, but repurposing. So it's much easier to take an existing drug that people know the risks versus a new to market. So there's a lot of correlation you can do against known existing drugs. You know the risk factors, but compare that against available data that's within a lot of these larger institutions, and you can now correlate existing drugs to existing conditions where you didn't see the connection before.
Thanks. Darren?
Cool. All of what they said doesn't work without the network. That's all I can say. At Arista, we deliver nonstop, highly available, very high visibility networks. We joke a little bit that the AI infrastructure is like a diva. It demands nonstop attention, a lot of bandwidth, and just demands a lot of our time. So we at Arista say that we're more like the stage crew, which means the diva doesn't get any attention if the stage crew doesn't actually show her some attention, or him or her some attention. So that's really what we do at the end of the day as Arista, is we build these great networks, whether it's for healthcare, whether it's for, you know, some of the other things, whether you're trying to get self-driving, whether you're trying to, sorry for those of you that use some of the social media, we do a lot of that as well. So there's all of those great things, but the reality for us is delivering a tremendous amount of data. And when we start thinking about healthcare, whether that's data from ICU monitors, whether that's data from radiology, all of that real-time data, we are able to process that data, bring it to the AI systems such that they can drive better outcomes. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we're focused on, is how do we give better outcomes to the patient, safer outcomes for the patient.
Thank you. All right, second question, and this will go in the opposite direction. What is an example of like a collaboration with Rice, with TMC, academia in general, or really any sort of someone else, someone outside of your firm, especially one that a collaboration you'd point to as kind of a successful model for people in the audience who might be interested in working with you? So I'll start with Darren.
Sure, I think one of the things that we love doing is working with some of the academic healthcare institutions here in the Houston area. And we're building out, you know, federated AI learning environments to where we're building architectures associated with those. At the same time, we're building large-scale campus secure environments where we're delivering on sort of that edge inference side of things with the overall university and academia. We kind of think of it as how do we come together? How do you bring researchers? How do you bring the brains together with Arista, which builds the backbone? And ultimately, how do we drive better outcomes? And that's, as I said earlier, the patient outcomes, the breakthroughs, those types of things. And we're doing that along with many of the medical research and academia providers here in the Houston area.
Thanks. Seth?
Yeah, so recently we were asked to assist with the digital health initiative between Houston Methodist and Rice University. So we're currently in the midst of deploying out a base pod cluster at Houston Methodist that's going to be a joint collaboration with students at Rice University. So that's in the midst of build out right now. We have a long-standing history with Houston Methodist building out their RI Institute. So this is an exciting next step really for all of us. It's the next evolution for our partnership, and then it also adds a very powerful cluster for the research team to use, expanding on what we've kind of built piecemeal in the past, but this is the first sort of big bang cluster, and it's also the first of its kind in the Med Center, so very exciting for everyone.
Thanks. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, so we're currently working with Rice and are building their new sort of AI supercomputer. This system is called Range. It's currently in sort of early adopters testing. In November, it's going to go into the next phase of testing, and it's going to onboard some new PIs. And November 10th and 11th, I'm going to be back on campus, and we're going to be running some educational events around, you know, open source LLMs and the history of the space, around using the system, around reproducible AI workflows, as well as possibly running a NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute. So Cambridge Computer is NVIDIA's 5-time Partner of the Year. And we as in me, I run their GPU and EDU program, where I travel around the country and develop custom curriculum for academic institutions. And when you buy a system from Cambridge, like it or not, you also get me. And when we deploy a system, we don't just drop it off at the dock. I actually come and I teach people how to use it. I teach your facilitators how to support their system. And we also help communicate best practices so you're able to use these nice, expensive resources at full utilization day one.
Thanks. Duncan?
I think one of the most interesting things about what I do at Vultr is getting to work with these kind of interesting intersections, right? Like Christopher had mentioned, with his background in computational chemistry, a case where, oftentimes those are the same types of teams that we're working with, right? You have an enterprise IT team that's got to figure out how to run this thing. We've got PIs on the far other side, that are, either head deep in grant writing or, the research, and then we've got folks sitting in the middle. So how do we take all of these different constituents? How do we align what their needs are so that we can go ahead and drive this forward? A very interesting case that we've been public about and we've spoken to is we work closely with a firm called Athos Therapeutics based out of Los Angeles. I previously, from the LA area, worked in academic computing at the University of Southern California. And, through different relationships, working with Athos, they're a precision medicine company looking to do research primarily on immunosuppressant diseases. So a case where they have identified a couple of specific use cases, with the AI capabilities that the systems have now, they're able to rapidly kind of choose particular molecules that work better for certain patients than other patients, and able to greatly accelerate, and target the efficacy. So for us, it's really just a case of, do I want to talk to, IT people and solve their problems today? Do I want to talk to PIs today? How do we work together so that we can finally actually, deliver the outcomes that we're all work so hard to deliver?
All right, thank you. All right, the final of my preset questions. Kind of being more speculative now, where do you see a promising area for growth in health-related AI impact? And this one, I'll let whoever can raise their hand first gets to go first. Who wants to go first? All right.
So I think for us, there's a tremendous amount of work going on right now around federated models, right? And how do we bring lots of different data together? And I was actually speaking with another healthcare institution up north, and how they're using blockchain and some of those capabilities. So we do think that this idea of federated models and edge AI is going to be important, because now we have all this great data, but we also have the security concerns and privacy concerns around that data. So we do believe that this federated model where we have a lot of the data, and then you're not transferring the data to a larger kind of centralized model, right? And that's pretty cool. We're just sending the insights. And so we do believe there's going to be a tremendous value in that, but then also pushing kind of that inference job out to the edge, right? And using kind of this edge inference, whether it's at the healthcare institution, whether it's academia, whatever it might be. We do think that there's a tremendous kind of future in that space. Now, then you layer on things like blockchain and some of the other things which are going to ensure some of the security aspects around that, is really where we start to see the future of where things are going for us from an infrastructure delivery, from a networking delivery standpoint.
That's okay. Yeah, so you mentioned edge AI, and I'd like to talk about that. So we all know the big compute problems, right? My colleague over here was talking about AlphaFold, right? AlphaFold has generated 200 million plus drug candidates already that are sitting there ready to be screened, right? And Minifold takes an application that used to take weeks and months of AlphaFold, now runs in hours to days, right? So we have to obviously do stuff with that. But to me, the really exciting stuff is how good can we do with small models, right? And the edge is where we're really doing the innovation, right? An ICU patient generates over 2,000 data points per second, right? A lot of the interesting stuff can happen at the edge at the point of patient care. And the really cool thing is things like this, all the wearables or like the Oura rings. Those generate up to 5 gigabytes per person per day. And most of our sort of healthcare data lakes and networks are not set up to handle this sort of deluge of data. So you really need, of course, you need to buy the big supercomputers. I work with NVIDIA, please keep buying those, right? But at the same time, you really need to think about what you can do at the edge. But when you start going to the edge, you then still have to worry about data management, federated identity, zero trust architectures. It's a hard problem to solve, but that is where I really think the novel and new innovations are going to happen over the next couple of years.
All right, thanks.
No, I'll jump in here. Where I can see this really having a huge impact is in the image analysis. So as many of you probably know firsthand, reviewing medical imaging is a labor-intensive task and also very difficult, especially for those working remote. We work with a lot of hospitals that are heavily leveraging VDI, so that trying to review medical imaging, even in 4K, over remote desktops is difficult. So additional augment tools that can increase the speed and accuracy of those reviews. So not necessarily taking the replacing a radiologist or anything to that effect, but earmarking things, making notes, making annotations, suggestions, maybe detecting things earlier on than it would be before. There's mountains and mountains of medical imaging and data out there. This is continuing to grow capacity-wise, resolution, 3D imaging. There's more to review, more scans, more tests. So the ability to kind of not necessarily automate, but give physicians more tools to review these images in a more accurate, quick fashion, I think will be definitely a growing need.
Thanks. Duncan?
I think kind of the idea that I had was kind of tying together the three different things that the gentleman just mentioned before. I think, the data is available now, right? Especially with the advent of EHRs over the last decade, lots of data, not even at 5 gigabytes per day per person, but, standard stuff, people going to the doctor once or twice a year. So that data now exists. Now we have ways to combine the networks, combine the identity, protect the privacy, and then to actually dig into this data further. I think it's really kind of population level analysis that, right now the data's been too disjointed. There's been no way to trust to be able to pass the data, to do the analysis so that we can then glean insights that, a N sample size of, 100, 1,000, when you're looking at potentially millions of data points, allow us to much more quickly reveal and using kind of your classic ML AI tool sets to be able to do that analysis can reveal that much more easily.
If I could maybe even add one thing onto that. So if we think about this, if we just deliver AI healthcare capabilities to the very metropolitan areas of the United States, we failed, right? And so we have to figure out how do we federate that data? How do we get that information out to the edge, which is where we start talking about edge AI. And whether that is from an inference standpoint, whether that's from an application, doesn't matter. But the reality is we've got to push that data out to kind of the rural communities, and that's where we can get a tremendous lift from a lot of this great information that all of the doctors and clinicians and everybody that we have here, their great diagnostic capabilities, let's push that out to the edge and make an impact there.
All right, thank you. At this point, see if any questions from the audience.
Message for Darren. Healthcare systems are usually under attack. How do you manage cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I think we've looked at it in many different ways, as my gentleman over here to the right, Chris said. The reality is that we have to segment some of these networks, right? So we're going to go to a new kind of segmentation model in this world. How do we segment the data? That's a whole different challenge that we've got to deal with. And I think that's where we from a network standpoint can segment the network, we can firewall things off, we can do interesting things in the network. We still have this data challenge of how do we kind of separate the data aspects. And I think that's where things like blockchain and some of those new technologies start to come along to help us out. The other interesting thing is that these networks are getting faster and faster and faster, and firewalls are getting somewhat faster, but the reality is you don't want to build this really high-speed AI network that then has a firewall that maybe does a terabit of throughput when the AI network's doing hundreds of terabits of throughput. And so I think we've got to get better at that, and we're starting to see some of the segmentation, the security aspects push into the network. Networking, for those of you that know, does things really, really well. Layers 3 and layer 4, layers 5 through 7. Sorry if you don't know what that is, look it up. 5 through 7, it doesn't, switches don't, and routers don't do that really well. So let's push as much as we can into the network and do some coarse-grained security there, and then the rest of the stuff will have to rely upon other mechanisms, whether that's firewall, applications, blockchain, et cetera. Does that make sense?
I think kind of in a cloud scale, this is something that we deal with all the time, right? This is something that we work with our HIPAA compliant customers with in terms of how from their corporate security perspectives, how we can, bring on many of the kind of same security in depth features as opposed to, once you're past the gate, everything else is open. How do you actually check everything through in and out as opposed to we checked in, we're just letting everything out the door at the same time. Lots of different ways to do that. Lots of different ways that work pretty well already in terms of architectures, in terms of, fundamental understandings of how we work with the data to protect it so that, patient data, personally identifying information all gets protected in the long run.
Any other answers from the panel? I think another question here in the middle.
Hey, I have a question to Christopher. So you mentioned zero trust several times. I'm interested in this topic. I think it's super important. So I want to dive into a very, very small direction. Suppose, we're building like a B2C application where PHI is collected, right? So you're calling probably large language models or other AI services or MCT agents, et cetera, but these are maintained outside, right? How do you build the zero trust or zero knowledge architect in order to address the concern from the end consumers?
All right, guys, I gotta go. So that's a very challenging problem, and I am not a networking expert, right? When we start talking about zero trust architectures, so I'm going to defer to the networking folks. At the end of the day, I'm a computational chemist who knows how to design systems, but I'm not an IT person.
Yeah, I think from a zero trust standpoint, we certainly can handle that in the network, right? But from an MCP standpoint, it's an application to the network. So there are elements of this where we are going to have to see those capabilities push into the application, push into the data. I have a friend of mine that handles a large storage company, and they're doing incredibly well based upon segmenting the storage aspects. So where customer A, B, and C have very segmented storage in an AI network. We're even how we leverage things in our own internal infrastructure. Like we have a completely separate Gemini instance that only our data goes into, only our training goes into. So I think you'll see more of that where we have, whether it's Anthropic or whether it's Google or whomever it may be, or even your own on-prem stuff, where it'll be your data and only your data. And then you get MCP that kind of jumps into the fray. And what was I saw the other day, MCP stands for more customer PII data, right? So meaning it's going to expose more and more of that private information. So how do we block that? And I don't have a great answer for it, right? I think there's some elements of application firewalls, and applications have to get smarter in that space. But listen, we've been running along for a long time with APIs that have access to massive amounts of data. We've solved this problem before, we'll solve it again. From a network standpoint, it's easy to slice the network up and handle, hey, you can't talk to this person or that person. That's very coarse level, right? When we start talking into the application space, it gets a lot harder.
Okay, I won't fully cop out. I'll give somewhat of an answer at the application layer,
Okay,
right? Which layer 7. Okay. Yeah. One of the things that has triggered sort of a paradigm shift in how you construct these workflows is going to production. So, is everyone familiar with RAG, Resource Augmented Generation, right? That's when you work with ChatGPT or Perplexity and you drag and drop a file, and that file, right, that information is now able to be queried and ingested as part of your prompt, right? Well, the problem with RAG is it bypasses all role-based access control. Right? You spend all this time setting up your CRM and your email and your Slack and your federated identity, and then you dump everything into RAG, and now everyone has access to the same data, right? So, the way that these are being replaced is via agentic workflows, right? And it used to be, if you're creating an agentic workflow, you as the developer had to write a custom app for all of your data sources, right? You'd have to scrape all of your services. But now with the invention of MCP, right, Model Context Protocol, the onus goes on the data provider, and you simply have to write the connector. But the problem then is, AI workloads need updated real-time information, which wants you to have an open network without a firewall that's able to get maximum performance, but at the same time, you want to be able to do these in air-gapped edge scenarios, right? So it definitely becomes a balancing act between fresh data, role-based access control, as well as having proper agentic access to your data, which understands the role of the user. So when I prompt a model that's in production, it should use my API keys to access the database or resume the role on my behalf. So I only get the access to the engineering data I have and not my HR data, right? So that's kind of how the paradigm shift is happening, right? When you agree?
What I'd say is, data governance becomes such a fundamental part of how you build your applications. This no longer becomes something you think about at the end. Okay, how do we built this application, it does what we want it to do. Now how do we split up the data so that I don't see the HR data, I see the engineering data, the marketing data, the clinical data, the older data, the newer data. It's really a case that from the beginning you need to think about, okay, these are my data sources. How do I control access to these data sources so that I can then provide that information into the application so that we can generate those rules up front as opposed to trying to superimpose them afterwards. Much easier to kind of do that, thought work. This is kind of, this is as Darren mentioned, storage vendors are making a killing right now because of those that have had this type of structured, data governance, data policy, and management for roles. This has become a way for them to take that existing intellectual property and apply that, to the next degree to an even larger amount of data, larger number of data sources. So that's where we typically, let's start with that conversation as opposed to you've already built it, it works this one way, and now we need to figure out how to turn the data access on and off afterwards.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
So I'm kind of curious because, all of you're external to the academic centers or the healthcare organizations. So I'm curious in terms of how you handle, after deployment, right, the transition to operations. What are the best practices or the challenges and opportunities that you've seen in kind of handling that?
So let me make it very clear. My parents would really prefer I was a doctor. So let's just make sure that dream of theirs has not gone away. I'll share kind of what we do, and then I'm sure David, who does this on a day-to-day basis as well, has things to share. Christian has things to share. A case where that's why, as I talked about in terms of who we engage with, when I take my team to engage, we literally treat all the different constituencies, where we need to meet them, right? The IT people care about one thing, the healthcare, clinicians care about one thing, the PI cares about one thing, the people running the trials care about something else. It's how do we provide them the information that they need, the structure that they need so that they can do their jobs after we're gone. It's pointless to build something that falls apart the second we walk out the door. I don't run a professional services company. If I worked for a big four, maybe my answer would be different. But I want something that the next day continues to run without us there, and it really just takes that engagement up front.
I'm an academic who's pretending to sell things, right? So I was faculty. I have a PhD in computational chemistry, and I was faculty at UT Austin and UT Dallas, and then ran research computing for MIT for a couple of years. We at Cambridge, we hire a bunch of scientists who are on staff to sort of talk to the scientist, take their science requirements and convert it to IT lingo, right, to then deploy the systems. But AI is sort of increasing the onus on the services and systems we're deploying, right? It used to be we just deployed a bare metal HPC system, everyone went off and ran their own code so they knew how to use it. But AI really is asking for more of like integrated solutions. And so what we have is a really cool incubator model. So we've been a company for almost 35 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not Cambridge, UK. And of course, we partner a lot with the local universities. And a good example is sort of an incubator program we have at Harvard. So we work with Harvard Research Computing to develop new strategies and new techniques and new best practices on sort of open science applications. Then we take it to Harvard Med School, where we implement it in a more secure manner to work with, PHI, PII, HIPAA, or genomics data that might be controlled unclassified. And now we're starting to develop partnerships with these research organizations that are housed in Harvard and have Harvard faculty members who teach, but the IT are run by hospital organizations. So we're gradually breadcrumbing from open science to medical school with data requirements. Now we're going to the hospital organizations, now that our solutions are more fully baked. And so that's kind of how we incubate our solutions and bring them to market.
I would say that the long-term running, the handoff is very important. So that's why we kind of take the teach to fish approach. So even if it's a full turnkey, fully managed solution on our part, we still try to bring in everyone from the customer organization as early as possible. So even if the initial conversation starts with a use case from a researcher, as we kind of see that develop and grow, we know that's going to involve IT folks. It's going to involve people who understand the cluster, the hardware, the compute, the GPU, the software. Likely it's going to pull in a large piece of networking. You're going to have storage teams. Eventually, as we brought up, you're going to have the security team involved. How do you handle governance? How do you handle anonymization of data? So all of those are going to come to pass whether or not it's fully managed by a partner, a vendor. It's much, I think, more efficient in the long run if you sort of own the process as much as possible. So in some case, it's repurposing people within your organization. Maybe this person was an enterprise storage admin and they can move over. This person was an HPC or VMware administrator. We've seen those folks kind of get repurposed. So a lot of it is building or retooling in-house skills so you can continue to sort of run with the ball once it's online. Because even if we're available to help you, you don't want to have to come to us with every issue. You want to be able to self-sustain in the long run. We'll always be there to help, but you want to be sort of your own first line of defense.
I think for us, if you start thinking about it, all of this great data that we have for the AI networks, from a clinician standpoint, we also have to give great data to the IT folks. So give your IT person a hug. The reality is, back to the premise of if the network isn't working, then you're not able to run jobs. And what we have found is some of these extremely large AI clusters, we're talking hundreds of thousands of GPUs, that the amount of data that cluster, that compute infrastructure can generate is just astonishing, right? And then taking that data and enabling it to run things better. So if you think about it, if I have 100,000 GPUs and I want to run a job across 50,000 of those GPUs, there's a lot of things that could break in that all have to run seamlessly, right? Every GPU has to work. Every network connection has to work. Every compute resource, like all of those things have to run and have to run well. And so I think there's been a lot of work going on how do we run jobs in smaller clusters because there's fewer elements to that. How do we get better data from the network, from the GPU side of things? How does the GPU tell the network that, hey, I'm struggling, like I'm not getting all the data that I was expecting to get. So don't send me the next job, right? How do I exclude that GPU from the infrastructure? So I think there's an element of obviously AI for healthcare, but there's also an element for AI for networking and infrastructure that we're now starting to see and starting to come online. And it's giving these IT professionals a lot of great insights that they then can run the AI infrastructure in a much more efficient way.
All right, thank you. Another question from the audience? Well, I have another question then. We were talking a lot about challenges. I'm wondering if we can maybe talk about something a bit more positive. Can you maybe, I'm not thinking off the top of my head, so this might be a very well-formed question, but can you talk about something exciting that's come up in the last year or so that you're excited about, the new capabilities, some new application, something that gives you, a chance to pitch something, something exciting that's happened in your perspective that you were able to do now that you weren't able to do before, and what that means for people here who are perhaps a bit removed from the underlying hardware?
Well, I can tell you about one project we're working on. So we're partnered with this company in Germany, and we're trying to create, ChatGPT for life sciences, right? So first, we have a product we're working on that's called Bioplexity. So it's Perplexity for life sciences. It has prompt engineering and agentic models to access to over 100 biomedical journals and life sciences and data sources and things like that. And then on top of that, we've sort of started putting together a cloud-hosted model which incorporates 6 foundation models, 2 from Anthropic, 2 from OpenAI, a Google model, as well as some Llama from Meta, along with Bioplexity. And it allows you to, it's called Biomedical Advisor. It does image analysis, it helps plan clinical trials and experimental plans. It is optimized for the Claude part. It's optimized for code generation, for genomics data and AlphaFold and programming exercises that are around those fields. And what's really cool about it is the reason it uses all of these models is it does more of a quorum method, where it would ask multiple models for the answer and then compares them together to help get rid of sort of the hallucination aspect. And it's currently in a free trial mode where we're trying to just get some feedback on the tools. So if you'd like more information about it, stop by the Cambridge Computer booth and I can give you my information and we can set you up and you can just start playing with it and give us some feedback.
For me, what has been really interesting over the last couple of years is how we've seen AI kind of come out of the computer screen, onto the lab bench. We're working with some companies that are really taking kind of how do they do drug discovery, how do they do screening, how do they look at the different paths that they're working on, and how do we enable the researchers to actually be more effective. We talked a little bit earlier about, AlphaFold, all of the different ways. We can generate, more molecules than we know what to do with now. How do we actually screen those molecules so that we can go ahead and identify those in a faster way, and not actually have to do so much lab bench work, that we've really identified at the end of the day a much smaller quantity, a much more higher level of confidence that this will be something successful to make it worth the time and energy to bring it to clinical trials. That's what I've seen in the last 2 years that's really accelerated the pace of discovery and impacting daily lives.
Yeah, I think for us, the tremendous amount of data that we're getting from the network, we're now starting to leverage in a very unique way. We have something called Autonomous Virtual Assist. AVA, as we call it, is taking all this great data, all this telemetric data that we're getting out of the network and getting even from the GPU side of things, and we're now able to start asking it questions that we frankly would have taken us a long time before to answer the individual problem they're dealing with. And so we're now taking that data and using it even on the support side on how we can leverage kind of our technical assistance data for internal. We don't expose that to customers, obviously, because there's a lot of customer data associated with it, but being able to use that internally and to help it solve problems is pretty phenomenal. We believe that we have better data going on in the infrastructure than any other network company out there, and it's seeing that exposed through these AVA models is really cool to see. In addition to that, on a personal side of things, one of the things around AI that I think is just absolutely astounding is the ability to have these specialized treatments by using AI models. I think Chris talked about earlier, going from what took years now to days. And somebody that was impacted by having cancer in my family and watching mom go through that and seeing over years what, sometimes it was a doctor guessing. And being able now, I think in the UK, they've launched the first AI-generated treatment that they're now going to treat patients very specific to their DNA and very specific to the DNA of the cancer. And we'll see how that turns out, but I think the ability to do that is phenomenal. Something that we couldn't do years ago is pretty darn special when we start thinking about the potential for that for the future.
Yeah, one piece that's not necessarily brand new, but is gaining a lot more traction and interest is within Omniverse and digital twins. So we've built out a few of these as sort of showcase demos for folks, and one that was particularly interesting, we built out a labor and delivery ward for a children's hospital, and we built it to the specs for the hospital, but interestingly, the digital twin of the physical room was built before the physical room was built. So what we were given is sort of blueprints, pictures, diagrams, floor plans of the layout, and all of the materials that were going to go into it, and we built it out and showed it to the team. And the interesting feedback we had was there was a few clinicians and nurses on the initial review when we were looking through it, and they asked us, well, why did you place the bed there? Why did you place this device there? And we said, well, we didn't, right? This is where you said you were putting it. And one of the nurses kind of jumped up and said, that's a terrible layout. Why would we ever lay out a room like that? That's inefficient. That's additional footsteps to get to where I need to go. You do that 1,000 times a day, and I'm walking an extra 3 miles for no reason. So they actually redesigned how the floor plan of this hospital just based on a digital twin we built. And while that isn't, the key use case for Omniverse, that's one of sort of the surprise use cases that came out of it, is that it became sort of a site optimization, workflow optimization tool. And I mean, that similar case is used in factories and assembly lines, but as simple as using it for what seems elementary. It's a layout. You're putting a bed and a crib in a room, but the feedback, was pretty substantial for this hospital.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience on this side.
With the Bioplexity, is there any ability to input time series data like EEG or ECG?
Yeah, so today, no, but it's currently under development. And I'm happy to put you in touch with the developers. They're taking input, but the plan is to be able to support multi-stream data, right? Multimodal data, and being able to synthesize it.
There's a lot of data in biomedical sciences that is not reproducible. And also, the error bars just don't make sense. It's in various publications. How do these people, maybe you don't know, but since you're supporting them, maybe you will be able to connect me to them?
Yeah, happy to connect. And I would say, in general, most science is not, most research is not reproducible.
70%.
Right. I would say it's more like 99%. As a computational scientist, I cannot read a paper and recreate it. I don't have the software, I don't have the input, I don't know what solver parameters they twiddled to make it converge, right? Or I don't have access to the 100 million core hours that were used to run the next molecular dynamics simulation. And I think validation in AI is a huge issue. So my background as a computational scientist is I worked in Bayesian inference and uncertainty quantification for large-scale predictive simulations, kind of the precursor to digital twins, right? And in that area, you have physics. You have physics realizable values, right? You expect your temperature to be positive if you're in Kelvin, right? You expect your pressure to be non-negative. You expect your flows to act in a certain way. But with AI, it's just interpolation in a word calculator. So, things that keep me up late at night are around validation in AI. And if I were still a faculty member, that's kind of where I'd be working. And that's kind of what I do in my spare time anyway, because it's really cool. I have some ideas, but nothing I'm willing to share wearing my Cambridge hat, because it's still experimental. But I'd love to take these conversations offline.
Yeah, absolutely, because another thing is, if the paper was published 20 years ago, are those techniques still viable, validated today? Or have they been superseded? Now, the data that was collected using the previous methodology, does it hold any weight at all? These kind of questions exist.
Yeah, it's tough, right? And it's even harder because a lot of the things we take quantitative data with unknown error bars, and we're trying to convert it into a qualitative answer, right? And I think it's a great example where you were talking about your digital twins, where you had management making decisions, but the people underneath never saw it, right? We need the kind of input here as well. As people who work with this every day, we need to get your input. A lot of what we're doing right now is more on just the programming and creating the agentic models and working with it. But it's a multi-step process, and there's some partners we're working with in Europe who's going to be part of the validation, but we'd love to get more people involved.
Okay, I think that's the time we have. So let's give a round of applause for our panelists.